Hey everybody, it's John from graphicallychristian.com. We're Christians making good art for everyone. And right now I have a guest, Al Nickerson. You can introduce yourself. What are some current projects that you're doing? Where can people go to find out what you do?
Well, I self-publish a comic book called An Act of Faith. So I write it and I draw it and I self-publish the comic. And I have a website called anactoffaithcomic.com where people can go and, read news about An Act of Faith or preview pages or connect to links where they can purchase the book. An Act of Faith is every bi-monthly book which is sold through Iver's Media, and Iver's Media, they have a website called comicsplusapp.com, so people can go there and search for An Act of Faith as well, but there are also direct links at anactoffaithcomic.com where people can purchase the book. So the book's a digital comic where people can get the app and download the comic and read it, or they can read the comic online as well. And it seems like, nowadays, digital comics, whether they're sold through Iver's Media or Comixology, seems to be really very popular nowadays, which is kind of cool.
All right, yeah. And so An Act of Faith, can you describe, like in a synopsis, what it's about?
Yeah, An Act of Faith, it's a superhero action adventure comic. It's a Christian comic book and has very strong Christian themes to it. And the main character initially is Rebecca Stern, and her superhero name is Crusader Girl. And she and a couple other superheroes, they find the sword from the Garden of Eden from the Book of Genesis. And in the first storyline, which is called Sword of Eden, the heroes try to find the sword because they realize the sword is still on Earth. And at the same time, these demons are trying to prevent the heroes from finding the sword because the demons believe that, if mankind has more evidence of God, then, that wouldn't be good for them. So the heroes try to find the sword and get it because they realize it's a very powerful weapon. And then, through this adventure, Rebecca Stern, Crusader Girl, she gains a new family within these superheroes, Nemish Man and Kid Cockroach and Professor Jack. And they go on other adventures where, they fight the Green Knight and Lilith, who's this demon who claims to be, Adam's first wife. And, of course, she's lying because, Adam only had one wife. And then, they fight Count Warlock, who's like this vampire, and they search for Noah's Ark, and that's kind of the new storyline that I'm working on now. It's a two-part storyline from, which is in An Act of Faith number 8 and number 9, and issue number 8 came out like several weeks ago.
That sounds really interesting. And I think when I was looking at your comic, I was noticing that there are a lot of mythological and spiritual characters and objects. Like everybody knows the Green Knight from the King Arthur stories, but you also have Noah's Ark and angels and things. And I'm not sure whether me and Matt covered this on a podcast or not, but we were discussing how there's comics like Ghost Rider that are left alone, and stuff like Harry Potter gets heat for being demonic. And we sort of discussed this over email, but you were sort of saying that to you, if it has a godly intent, if it's trying to, speak the truth in some way, that would be the line in the sand that you would draw. But can you explain a little bit more about how, if you've had any difficulties writing these sort of stories, if anybody's been critical of them, or if you've had any personal difficulty writing spiritual and fantasy in the same sort of world?
That's a very good question. I haven't gotten any negative feedback. I've gotten a lot of support and great feedback from readers. The thing that I really would like to see more of is to have more Christian content in comics and in entertainment overall. And that's really why I'm working on An Act of Faith. Because we see so many ungodly things in mainstream comic books, and it make me particularly happy. And a lot of secular entertainment, like film and television, is so empty. So I want to see more Christian content and entertainment, and that's kind of why I do an act of faith. I don't have any difficulty in that. I think that's really kind of like my passion to, really deal with Christian-themed comics and create comics where other Christians are going to enjoy. They're not going to feel like they're insulted, or they're not going to feel like, they're compromising their principles, because I see a lot of that, like in, secular media.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned Harry Potter and the Ghost Rider thing, and I think what you're saying is that a lot of Christians are saying that Harry Potter is demonic, but they don't really address Ghost Rider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's stuff like Ghost Rider where just because it's sort of, well, actually, Matt brought this up. Ghost Rider sort of looks demonic, and so people don't really look at that. They might look at that more negatively, and then maybe something like Touch Like an Angel, since it is positive, they'll gravitate towards it. But like you said, most of that stuff is pretty empty. It's not really directing people to Christ. It's, making God sort of a pleasant, overlooker and things like that.
Right. I think the thing with Harry Potter is because you're really, pointing out at a property that has a mass audience, because Harry Potter is phenomenally popular, through, the novels and the, films and stuff. I don't know how many people are, other than some comic book readers, are really very familiar with Ghost Rider. So maybe that's why a lot of Christians may be picking on Harry Potter a little bit more, because it's really on the out front of, entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But Touched by an Angel, I've actually never watched it. But, I think we should have more, television shows and films and movies and, comics that really, do focus on biblical things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if Touched by an Angel does that or not. I guess it sort of does. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I've seen one or two episodes. I was never really faithful in watching it, but it just always seemed to me like it was trying to make, it was the guardian angel principle, and I think that's another thing that you can get into, is that there are these other sort of like mini fantasies that you can create about religion, and I think personally that's where I as a creator have had problems, is because I can put spiritual things into my fantasy world, but I would never want to sort of advocate to people that is reality. But I think that you and there are other Christian artists that are sort of striking a balance where, you're obviously not trying to make, some sort of compromise with your faith, but you just want, since you want more Christian things out in entertainment, there's a way that you can do that is pointing people to the truth, and not, trying to make its own little world like Touched by an Angel was, where it didn't really get into anything about God.
Oh, I see what you're saying. There's no one more important than Jesus, and having the gospel message, told through entertainment, I think is very important. So yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. In regards to like seeing quote unquote supernatural stuff, like on television, we'll see like television shows or films dealing with like angels and demons, but they're probably not done in a very biblical manner.
Right.
And that bothers me. So I think, if creators are going to use angels and demons or touch upon God in fiction, then it should be done in a biblical manner, because what's really the point? So there are a lot of supernatural shows and, films that tend to be very popular nowadays, or we'll have like TV shows like, The Vampire Diaries or Twilight or stuff like that, where they have like sort of like supernatural things, in their stories, but they're usually done in not a biblical manner, and yeah, it sort of makes me sad and kind of annoys me a bit. But as far as an act of faith goes, yeah, I want the gospel message in there, and if I'm doing stories about demons and angels, I want them portrayed accurately. But it is a work of fiction, in regards, like, I don't believe superheroes really exist. I don't believe in aliens or vampires really exist. But, these are characters that I use, in a work of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, I think I was thinking the other day about this, and I was thinking about the parables that Jesus told. If you think about the story of Lazarus, the rich man in that story is speaking to Abraham from hell, and I don't know if there were any Pharisees in the audience that were ticked off that he was, making this sort of strange thing happen that doesn't really, I don't know, like if they thought he was being literal or something, but he was using hell and heaven and creating an instance where you could talk from one place to the other, and it was pretty obvious what the story was about. It was about not trusting in your riches to save you, but he did use heaven and hell in a way that were not, this is how hell is, this is how heaven is. It was all used to illustrate the story of come to me because I'm the only one who can save you. And so I think that's really what we both agree on, is that you need to, if you're trying to tell a story that is factual, you need to be biblical about it. And if you're trying to, do a parable and make it something that is promoting good and, there is a good moral to it, you need to be aware of that and make that very clear to the people that you're writing to. Well, I think that's really good. I'm glad we had that discussion. And then another thing that intrigued me, and you may not be a part of it anymore, but I figured I would ask you about it anyway. I noticed that you write for a magazine called Back Issue, and I for a while I read the Wizard magazine, and now it's only digital. And I was wondering if you could explain to me a little bit about what that is, whether it's running anymore, and your involvement with it.
Absolutely. Well, actually, one thing I wanted to address when you were talking about like Abraham's bosom, I actually take that very literally. When
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was actually talking about that, I think he was talking about like a literal thing.
Uh-huh.
I think he was very serious about that.
Okay.
As far as back issue goes, I think I started writing for back issue back in 2005. And what had happened was, like, I was writing a lot of stuff online about comic book creators' rights and comics and stuff. And I think I contacted Roy Thomas, who edits a book called Alter Ego. And, trying to see if I can get some writing work. And he referred me over to Michael Urey, who, publishes, or edits, I should say, Back Issue magazine. And, for several years, 5 or 6 years, I was writing articles for Back Issue magazine. And at the same time, I was still inking, for Archie Comics, and I was inking for DC Comics at the same time. But being able to write these editorials for Back Issue magazine, it just gave me an opportunity to use different creative muscles, so that was a lot of fun, and I was able to write about things that I really enjoyed as a fan. Back Issue magazine is still being published. I haven't written anything for them in a little while, but yeah, I still get emails from Michael Urey about submitting ideas for articles and stuff, but I'm just not all that interested in writing about, comics that were once published by Marvel and DC, and that's kind of really what Back Issue is all about, and it's a great magazine. It's one of my favorite magazines, but I'm just not really interested in writing about, corporate-owned comics anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So the stories that I was able to write about, the articles and interview the various creators that I really liked as a reader and as a young fan, was great. And I was able to write about, like, the John Byrne's Uncanny X-Men, or the early issues of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or some work by, Joe Staton, or John Byrne, or Roger Stern, and those guys. So that was a lot of fun.
Hmm.
So, but you've read Back Issue before, or you like the magazine, or?
Well, I before I read Wizard magazine, and I really liked how there was actually a magazine about comics, and I think that genre, at least of you go to the magazine rack and there's like 50 magazines for video games and none for comics. And so I hadn't gotten a chance to read one yet, but it really intrigued me because, I think it's good to read, especially since, the principle is for video game magazines, you'll get reviews of, video games before you buy it, and having another magazine for comics that talks about what's good to read, what might not be good to read, it just sort of intrigued me, and so I'm glad you're able to tell our viewers about, where that is and what it's about.
Back issue, it is published by Tomorrow's Publishing, and they publish a lot of great books.
All right. Well, the next question I have here is, what inspired you to become an artist?
That's a very good question. Ever since I was a little kid, I always had the interest to draw, and even like when I was like 5 years old, my parents would go and buy me comic books, and I was a big fan of cartoons and comics, and especially like anything that had to do with Batman or Spider-Man. When I was a kid, I really loved. And then I just kept drawing, and I kept reading comics, and I continued to become very passionate about the medium. So, I think when I was like about 12 years old, I really started thinking about like maybe I can make a living, drawing comics, and that's kind of like where it went. So I've always been like very focused in that regard. So after high school, I went to the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. I learned how to create and draw comics, and I had some really wonderful teachers like Will Eisner and Gene Colan and Sal Amendola and Harvey Kurtzman, a lot of these great comic book creators as my teachers. And then like soon after that, I started working in comics and became an inker, and eventually I just got kind of tired of working in secular comics anymore, and I really wanted to do something that had a very strong Christian themes, and I wanted to give back, and I wanted to give back to God and have a purpose and do God's will. That's kind of like what I'm doing with An Act of Faith, and hopefully I'm succeeding in that regard.
All right. So if you were to pick maybe among your teachers or different artists that you read, who would you say are influences on your art?
In the 1980s, when I was like in high school and college, like John Byrne had a huge impact on my art style. Like he and Terry Austin, when they were working on Uncanny X-Men, especially Terry Austin, like his inking was just beautiful. Like he had a very slick, smooth line. And I realized like all the comics that Terry Austin was inking at that time looked a lot better than like some of the other inkers. So I really wanted to be an inker when I really discovered Terry Austin. And, Frank Miller and Kyle Jansen, when they were working on Daredevil or The Dark Knight Returns, that had a huge impact on my style. But also like, having Will Eisner as my teacher at SCA, that was a huge impact. And also I'm a huge fan of like Jack Kirby's storytelling. And these guys really had a huge impact on my work.
Yeah, I can imagine Will Eisner being your teacher is that's a pretty big influence.
Will was great. I was at SVA for the 4 years, and he was a teacher of mine for 3 of those 4 years, and he was just a really great guy. So I was very fortunate to know him a bit and have him teach me. So that was wonderful.
All right. So another thing we sort of touched on a little bit, but a big thing about this site and about what me and Matt talk about is that there's some Christian artists and media, comic books, movies, books that we recommend, and some others that we sort of want people to stay away from, or at least, we see a lot of Christian romance movies and family movies, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just not something that, we sort of want something new. So all that to say, is there any Christian media that you would recommend, or any that you would not recommend?
Well, I'm all for any like real Christian entertainment. As far as comics go, I was a huge fan of a webcomic called From Nothing by Steve Crispo.
Mm-hmm.
and I just love that. That was like one of my favorite, web comics. And Steve kind of put that on hold a couple of months ago, but I keep bugging him about, going back to doing From Nothing. It was a great, wonderful web comic. There's a book published by Terry Moore, and Terry Moore used to self-publish a comic called Strangers in Paradise, and he's self-publishing a book called Rachel Rising. I don't know if I would actually call it a Christian comic book, but Terry Moore is a Christian. But it's a little creepy. It's got some thriller and suspense stuff in there. It's certainly not for really young readers.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as film goes, The Passion of the Christ was a great movie. I love that film.
Yeah.
And there's sort of documentary films, Christian documentary films I like Monumental, Kirk Cameron, which was really good, or the 180 movie by Ray Comfort. So stuff like that I really do enjoy. But you mentioned there are some Christian movies and television shows that you're telling people not to see. What exactly were you referring to?
Well, I think we've never actually come out against any movie. I think we just sort of like having artists give their opinion about whether there's a movie that we thought was unbiblical or, I mean, there have been movies that I've heard some bad things about, particularly one that comes to mind is God's Not Dead. I haven't seen it yet, but I heard that it sort of unnecessarily makes the non-Christian in the movie the villain in it and doesn't really give him a very realistic, writing. He sort of becomes like a bully in the story. And I just think that there are certain Christian things written and produced that are not necessarily written to be biblical or to be, they're sort of written to sing to the choir, basically. They're not out as much to evangelize as get people who are Christians to come and pay money for the movie. And I just think that there's movies like that could be done better to be evangelistic and be more focused on the people that aren't Christians in the audience. So yeah, there's not one thing I would and I would say I'm on your side in terms of getting more Christian entertainment out there at all. But there are just certain like Heaven is for Real. There are certain movies that and I enjoyed that a lot more than I thought I would. But it seemed to me that it was designed for a Christian audience and not necessarily a wider audience.
So you think it's vital that we have the gospel message in any sort of film or television show or comic? That seems to be where you're a little.
Oh yeah. I think if it's produced by Christians and the idea is that it'll have like Bible stories in it and it'll have a message that's specifically about God, then it's better to have it designed to be an evangelical movie than just a movie that they're betting that Christians will see. And I guess that's not like the worst thing you could do, is design a movie just for Christians. But I think that it should understand that, yeah, like you can get a movie where everybody can go there and say, yes, I believe in God, and so I like this movie. But all the people that don't in the audience will sort of feel like, well, that's good that you do, and be able to walk away from it, as opposed to if the movie was more even-handed, then maybe they would be more likely to enjoy it and really get something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Well, I think I understand what you're saying. It is vital to share the gospel, and if the gospel message is in there, I think that's great. I haven't seen God's Not Dead yet. I've heard a lot of good things about that film, so I will get around to watching that. But I've heard a lot of good things about the film. I haven't seen it, so.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. But I'm glad we got to talk about that too. This has turned into more of a give and take that I thought would happen, but that's good.
Well, I mean, I'm very curious about like what are some of the things that you guys are talking about too. So.
Right. All right. Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. Um, and the last thing I'll ask is, what advice do you have to artists, Christian or otherwise?
Well, besides working on self-publishing and active faith, I also teach a class called Sequential Art Comics Illustration at State University of New York. And some of the main things I'm always talking about to my students is that it's really important to be persistent, especially in a field where it's so competitive. You're going to get a lot of rejection. So you're going to be sending out submissions to like Marvel and DC if that's kind of like your thing, and you know you want to work for Marvel and DC, and you are going to get a lot of rejection letters and stuff. But the thing is, you got to just keep at it, you know, because eventually, you know, you will succeed. And you have to be very passionate about the medium, you know, because if you want to like pencil Spider-Man or write Superman or whatever, and you get like your first rejection letter and you just stop, I mean, you can't do that. You just got to keep at it. And you got to love the medium, and you got to keep drawing. You got to keep drawing, and you have to keep writing. And the thing is like we all have a purpose, and we all have to do something. So it's probably more beneficial to do God's will, do what you're here to do, and be happy about it. Because otherwise, you're going to be doing something that you're not going to be happy about doing. And who wants to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. That's great advice. And before we go off, I end pretty much every interview with if there's anything that you didn't get to say that you wanted to, or a question that I didn't ask that you think the listeners deserve an answer to.
Well, like one thing I want to address, like I don't know how you guys feel about some of the things that we see being published today in comics, either by Marvel or DC or that sort of stuff. But the thing is, like within Active Faith, it is a Christian comic, and we sort of talked about this a little bit. But I also love superheroes, and that's kind of like why I really have like that, superheroes in the story. And I do like action adventure, and you mentioned the Green Knight, and actually that was kind of cool that you actually knew where that character came from. So I like to put all these elements in there that are really fiction in the story, because that's the kind of comic that I like to read. So, but there's not a whole lot of comics out there that, I really enjoy anymore. I mean, there's some stuff published by like Image or IDW, and I think Image and IDW are publishing some really wonderful comics. And there's a lot of self-published comics or creator-owned comics, which I really do enjoy too. So I don't know what you guys are reading nowadays, or some of the things that you like, or are there any comics out there that you guys just really can't stand?
Yeah, I've actually stopped, I guess with the maintenance of the site and everything, it was harder to get books in, and I think me and Matt both sort of suffered from that too, is that, once we were starting to get serious about what we were creating, we started noticing the level of quality that comics were at. I think one book that I'm actually pretty faithful on is I think the traditional Batman book, not Detective Comics, but the solo Batman book. It's written by Scott Snyder and drawn by Greg Capullo. That was really something that, even with all the New 52 business that was going on, really maintained quality. And I think you can sort of see that from the fact that, Scott Snyder went from that to doing Batman Eternal, and now everybody's saying that book is good. I haven't had a chance to read that yet. But you're right. Like for a while there, I was subscribed to Amazing Spider-Man when J. Michael Straczynski was writing that, and yeah, John Romita Jr. was on the art, and that was.
Oh, that was awesome stuff. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that I have pretty much all the trade paperbacks from that run, and that was an amazing run. And then they did the Brand New Day thing, and they sort of got rid of Mary Jane being his wife. And I'm not really that one for it doesn't really bother me that much about retconning, but just the fact that JMS was off the book and there was a new writer, I didn't really. So that was when I was sort of lost. Like, what am I gonna read now? And I read Walking Dead for a little while when that was like a big deal. Um, but after that, I was just sort of jumping from book to book until, me and Matt sort of were sharing Batman. Like, each of us will pick up different books, and I think that's the one book I'm on now. But I agree with you that Image and some of the other creator-owned titles are really where it's at right
Oh,
now.
I totally agree. I mean, I think as a reader, I think those books, the creator-owned books, are a lot more interesting and entertaining. But if you also look at the history of some of the big publishers like Marvel or DC or Archie Comics, working in comics and learning really about the history of comics, it's sort of like I lose interest in, being, a fan of Marvel or DC,
Hmm.
just kind of like sours my point of view and whatever they publish,
Right. Yeah, I was a big fan of Marvel for a while, and I liked I think when Brian Michael Bendis started doing the events that became sort of real big, I was into him, and then they did like Civil Wars is a pretty good event book, um, but after a while the events just sort of I think got out of hand, and um, I think that was when I stopped sort of saying like I'm a Marvel fan, because not because I was like bitter or anything, but I agree with you. Just saying that you're a DC guy or a Marvel guy, or even if you're just like I'm a Dark Horse guy, that can just sort of get a little stale, because really as a creative person, like we, I guess, just gravitate towards new things. We want something new, and yeah, I would say that that's that's where I am right now in terms of reading. Are there any books that you're um, following right now, particularly, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, overall, I think this is a great time for comics because there's so much different genre out there now. I mean, you have superhero comics, of course, which I love,
Hmm.
but you got like action adventure comics, you have like detective comics, you have like supernatural comics. So there's all different types of comic books out there.
Hmm.
The things that I read now that I really do enjoy are Invincible by Robert Kirkman and Brian Otley,
Hmm.
which is a superhero comic.
Right.
So if you like superheroes, I think that's something good to pick up, although some of the violence is a little bit graphic. Rachel Rising by Terry Moore, I really enjoy. I'm picking up the Maximized. IDW, they're reprinting the old Max comic book from the 1990s, but
Hmm.
they're recoloring everything,
Oh.
and that's really, really awesome. Um, I think the only other thing Walt Simonson, he just came out with a book which is published by IDW called Ragnarok. So
Hmm.
it's really great to see Walter back doing something, that's creator-owned and really focusing, like on Norse mythology. So the first issue of that came out a few weeks ago, so that was really good. The only, I totally avoid DC, and I pretty much avoid Marvel as well, but the only Marvel book I get from time to time is All New X-Men whenever Stuart Immonen is drawing it.
Hmm.
And that's the sole reason why I pick up the book, because I just love his artwork.
All right. Well, that sounds pretty good. And I'd like to thank you for lending your voice. I think you really, you know, gave us something that was interesting, and I really hope everybody checks out Active Faith comic on the internet, and gives your comics a chance. We all really need some good Christian voices out there in comics, and I'd like to thank you for being one of those.
Yeah, thanks for your time, John. I appreciate it. Yeah, if readers want to go to nextfaithcomic.com, I have links to my Twitter page and my Facebook page as well. So, everything's over there. And yeah, thanks for your time and thanks for the interview. I really appreciate it.